And welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. Joining me right now is Kevin DeVries, who's the host of the EPL Roundtable. He does a fantastic podcast, which I do come on every once in a while to talk about the league as a whole. But Kevin happens to be a massive Tottenham Hotspur supporter, so I'm having him on right now to give us his perspective on the upcoming match against Fulham. So, Kevin, before we go any further, I always say, before we get into really breaking this down, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts to Cottage Talk. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. Okay, Kevin, let's just get to it. Your thoughts on Spurs? It's been an interesting season. We were talking about it on the EPL Roundtable. We'll talk about Conte in just a second. That's a separate issue we'll talk about. Just let's talk about as a whole this season. What's going on with Spurs?
A lot, as I'm sure people have noticed. I don't know where to begin with what's gone wrong this season, because I'm sure people saw what we did in the summer and thought that we were bolstering ourselves well. Yeah. There was stuff on The Athletic about how Tottenham could close the gap to the top two because Conte historically wins the league in his second year and all this stuff. But I feel like a lot of that was relying too much on historical patterns to project instead of actually thinking about where the club was when making predictions like that going into the year. I had multiple friends that were like, do we have a chance this year? I was like, no, not to win the title. I would have expected top four. And I guess if there's one silver lining to this cloud, it's that the meltdown under Pochettino and the meltdown under Mourinho had us nearly 10th. I think we were actually 13th under Pochettino when he was let go. We're currently having a meltdown in 5th, which is a very different vibe. But with that said, Conte's system is all about two things: defending well, not conceding goals, and then overperforming with your forwards. At Inter, he was overperforming with Lukaku and Lautaro Martinez. At Tottenham, for the last 4 seasons, Son and Kane have both overperformed their expected goals. This year, both of them are underperforming their expected goals. The system does not work if you're letting goals in and if your strikers aren't overperforming. And they aren't even normal performing right now. There's a lot of issues with the midfield. We've had a lot of injuries with Kulusevski, who I'm sure people have seen the stats of how Tottenham perform with Kulusevski and without. So his in and out with injury stuff has obviously been damaging. We lost Bentancur for the majority of January after the World Cup, which is impactful. But it's increasingly seeming like the formation that we're currently playing, which is a 3-4-3 with just 2 central midfielders, is not working anymore. It's too easy for teams with lackluster midfielders to control the midfield because they have that extra body. And then let alone when you play teams that have good midfielders that are then capable of just really eviscerating the midfield. So if you can't connect the defense to the attack in any meaningful way, and if the few chances the strikers are getting, they aren't scoring, and if the few chances we're allowing are going in, big recipe for failure there. And that's what the Conte system is built upon. And we're going to touch on some other aspects here, but the Conte system is built on not conceding and scoring with the chances you get, and Tottenham aren't doing either this season.
Okay, very interesting, because when we really break down the match in just a few minutes here, Fulham are, again, their engine room, that midfield 3 is very important to what they do. Totally. So the key to this match for me is going to be if Fulham can control that midfield with Paulinho, Reed, and then, of course, Pereira, which I think if they do, they're going to win this match. But that, to me, is going to be how this match is going to be settled. But interesting that, like you said, we were talking about on the podcast we just did, that kind of a little bit what you said with your defense, Kevin, is not what it has been in the past. If they're leaking goals and you're not scoring goals, that's a recipe for where you are right now. I'm talking about you are where you are. You're in good shape. If you were Fulham, if you were us, we were like, oh my God, what are you complaining about? But I understand, coming from a supporter of Tottenham Hotspur, you're thinking, well, this is just, there's something really wrong here. But let me ask you this, because we were talking about that it really starts with your defense. Is that where it begins? Or is it the fact that Son and Kane are just not where they were, or is it just both?
I mean, honestly, it's probably just both. But if you want a more interesting take on it, I think there are two statistics that are really telling.
Okay.
One is that we have, in 10 plus matches, we've conceded twice or more, which if you're conceding one, you're getting draws. If you're conceding two, you're getting losses, which is how you have Tottenham already with 7 on the year, which only Fulham in that top 8 have done.
Right.
So I think that's a very damning thing. So if we were able to hold teams to 1 goal, I think we'd be much better off. So I guess I'd go defensively. The other thing is that no player has more individual errors leading to goal in the league than Hugo Lloris, and no team has more individual errors leading to goal than Tottenham Hotspur. So the defense and Hugo are both in a really bad way right now. And we'll get to that when we do a predicted 11, because I'm not so sure our club captain and World Cup winner Hugo Lloris is even going to play. But yeah, the defense is crazy. 4 managers now have had to heavily rely on Eric Dyer, and he's let down all of them. I think he has a great footballing mind that is not reflected in his ability on the pitch. So managers keep feeling like they can trust in him, they can rely on him. I think one of the reasons why we are where we are is because nobody has managed to actually displace Eric Dyer. Davinson Sanchez was supposed to be that person like 5 years ago, never turned into that player. You brought in Christian Romero, who had been playing the central role for Atalanta, but because our right-sided center backs are Japhet Tanganga, who's always hurt, and Davinson Sanchez, who literally is incapable of glancing over his shoulder. Romero's been playing right side center back with Dyer through the middle. I don't have an issue with our left-sided center backs. I think Clement Longley and Ben Davis is a good enough left center back duo to get you to a top 4 spot. But I think that central center back role or right center back role, you could fix either of them. Romero move centrally, have a better right center back, or keep Romero at right center back and bring in a better distributing central center back. Because it's easy to talk about the defensive issues of the defense, but the other issue is Conte really relies on them to be able to connect to the midfield. And outside of Romero, who's very good at driving up the pitch, the other options aren't really doing it. Longley should have the ability, but doesn't do it all the time. Dyer is a little errant. He just hits the ball really hard, which makes it really easy for a midfielder to not be able to control the touch. And if you have 2 midfielders and the other team has 3 midfielders, easier for them to get onto it. The wingbacks don't connect into play nearly as much as they need to. They're all decent ball carriers, but none of them do anything with it. So if you're overweighted in the midfield and you can't create centrally, and your center backs can't connect to the midfield or with balls over the top, and your wing backs are the only available passes to your center backs and they can't connect to the attack either, you can kind of see how easily disjointed our attack can become if things aren't going right.
Wow, that's a mouthful that you just went through. And what's interesting about this, and I have to ask you about Sessegnon in a bit. I just have to
by rule.
By rule, I have to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
But as we talk about Conte and his system, we can also talk about what's going on there with all the speculation that he might not be back. We're seeing that. I actually was told about that even today, that there's more speculation about it, but who knows? But regardless, what we were talking about on the preview episode is the reliance on the wingbacks. But I think this goes to what you were just saying, Kevin. If you don't have ball-carrying center backs, then I think that causes some of the issues that you're having. And that's one of the advantages I think Fulham have right now, believe it or not, with Tim Ream. Tim Ream can read the game, and Tim Ream can actually get the play going to our midfield and also out on the wing if he needs to, along with Diop. They've been doing that. So that, to me, it's interesting that you don't have that. And then, of course, the situation with your wingbacks. I mean, like I said, we can go on and on, but just share your thoughts on what is going on with the situation with Conte, and how do you see this playing itself out?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm sure people have seen there's basically an Italian media brawl between what Fabrizio Romano heard someone say and what Gianluca Di Marzio probably actually heard someone say. Not to editorialize too much.
Right.
Romano said that it's his opinion that Conte won't be there by the end of the year, and there were some mistranslations saying that he was definitely done. While I don't think that has been decided from a club or a personal level from Conte's side, I don't think that means it isn't the most likely outcome, because it probably is. Tottenham have the ability to extend the contract by one more year. But with the way we're currently playing, the way we're trending, Conte's continued demands for high-profile players, but Tottenham not sure if he's going to be here long-term. My guess, and hey, I'll say my guess so that it's very clear, is that we won't buy Conte the players that he wants, senior, established players with little resale value, unless he signs a long-term contract. And Conte won't sign a long-term contract until we show that we'll buy him players that are ready to win now. And so it's just going to be a loop of hell basically through the end of the year. Everybody that looks at the table can see that the gap between the top four and everyone else is opening up.
Right.
So without significant action, specifically at right wing back, Pedro Porro, obviously the most linked. There are a couple other options I'd probably prefer a little bit more, but even if it's just Pedro Porro, his ability to create and attack and cross and all that stuff, the dynamism he'd display at right wing back is better than anything we currently have. If we get Pedro Porro, we probably make top four, and if we get an attacking midfielder, I'd bet money on it. But there's no sign that either of those things are going to happen. And every morning I wake up not knowing if the news story is going to be Conte left, Conte was fired, we signed a player. Who knows? Every morning you just got to check the official channels to see what's been happening. But my guess is we probably finish somewhere between 5th and 7th, and Conte walks without us really meaningfully trying to retain him. And then obviously the obvious answer is Pochettino. And then the less obvious, but makes way more sense if you're looking at the trend line being Mourinho Conte, would be Thomas Tuchel. But I don't know how well that would be received by fans. But ex-Chelsea that's won trophies seems to be all it takes to get hired by the club at the moment.
Okay, and getting back to talking about what could happen next, I'm still, and I understand the position in the table, and that's why Pochettino probably was like, how that thing all blew up. But the thing is, and just as my opinion as an outsider, he's the best manager you've had. And I don't understand. I would do whatever I could to bring him back if you're going to move on from Conte. Tuchel, yeah, I understand that. But for me, it's Pochettino. Pochettino, I thought, Kevin, is when you were playing your best football. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it was. No. I think it's a really fascinating debate when people try to talk about how good Pochettino is as a manager, because I think the vast majority of Pochettino's work happens Monday to Friday. And I think the point of managers like Conte, like Mourinho, is their ability to do opposition scouting, to tinker with the formation and lineup based on what they need from their team in a particular match and what they expect the other team to do. Pochettino's biggest flaw was tactics. He was incredible at displaying what the club's vision was about finding pieces that would fill the right holes. At the time, we had a director of football that was very good at that in Paul Mitchell, which is how we got like Dele Alli for as cheap as we did from MK Dons and all that stuff. So I think that was the shift, is Pochettino made it to enough semifinals and finals that we realized if the other team knows exactly what you're going to do and they know exactly who the 11 is going to be, elite managers know how to counteract that. So we always finished well in the league. We always played well because we had a lot of consistency in the 11 that was picked. The tactics were always exactly the same. The players had a lot of free reign on the pitch, which obviously they don't really have in a Conte system. But I always find that fascinating when people are like, where does Pochettino rank among elite managers? Because I think it's a difficult one, because I don't think he's there tactically. And I think with the way the game is moving, you need to have an elite tactician, but that hasn't worked for us either. I think the other huge thing about the split between an idea of hiring a Tuchel, sticking with Conte, or moving to Pochettino is it means you're giving up on this window, which there's only 4 players left from, by the way. It's Son, Kane, Dyer, and Lloris.
Right.
If you move on again, you move to a Pochettino. Last year, if we had moved on to a Graham Potter, that's admitting that this cycle is over. And you're probably better off selling Kane, selling Son, selling Hugo, using that money to reinvest into younger players, which, of course, people don't really trust the club right now to spend money where it needs to be spent. But I think that's at the soul of this debate, is are we still trying to win? Are we trying to see Hugo lift a trophy? Are we trying to see Kane lift a trophy? Or do we need to recognize that with all the chopping and changing, with players being bought for different managers, but mostly only playing for the next one, do we need to just stop the cycle and hit a full refresh?
Very interesting stuff, Kevin. And it's one of the great reasons why I wanted to have you on is even just to touch on Pochettino, because it sounds like based on what you're telling me, his tactics are predictable because they stay the same. They do what they do. And again, I don't want to bore anyone talking about Pittsburgh Steelers here in the U.S., but that's kind of what it sounds like to me.
The standard is the standard.
They do what they do, and this is who they are. But good managers, great managers, will find ways to beat that. And that sounds like that's what happened with Pochettino. So that's a very interesting situation there about what to do. And then, like I said, Conte is a very accomplished manager, but it's his way or the highway. So that's kind of like we said, you're kind of in this, I guess you could say, mess. But talk about mess, my friend. Now you are contractually obligated to talk about Ryan Sessegnon. So now we have to go and talk about a mess.
Yeah.
So I really want to know. I ask this all the time, but I am just fascinated. We talked about it on the last show. We actually did a segment called "Who Won the Deal?" And we have Fulham winning the deal because Sessegnon has not really worked out to the capability that I think Tottenham really wanted. I think Tottenham thought he was the finished article when they got him because he still has all this talent. So I think part of it happened for him. Now, this is just me speaking from the outside. The change of managers, obviously, I think really affected him.
Yeah.
But I don't know what's going on now because now you have Conte. I thought you even told me you thought Pochettino was the right manager for him.
Yep.
And we've moved on a few years now, and he is not playing regularly. Whenever I go on Twitter to check out what people are saying, I would say 80 to 90% is negative. So what's going on with Ryan Sessegnon? Why has it not worked out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. If you were going to have two managers work with a talent like Ryan Sessegnon at fullback or wingback, is there anyone you'd rather have than Pochettino and Conte? Conte, who turned Victor Moses into a Premier League winning right wing back, turned Hakimi from just kind of an average right back into arguably the world's best right back. Pochettino, who turned, Walker and Walker Peters and Kieran Trippier all into better players, Danny Rose on the left. Like, the track record between these two managers of turning, at best talents into elite players or at worst average players into pretty good reliable ones is really high. So it's really odd to me that it keeps not working. I know this time last year, you were like, maybe it's time for Sessegnon to go. I was like, he's playing every week for Antonio Conte and a team that's going to make the Champions League.
Right.
Like, it looked like it was working. He was really good down the back half of last season, in my opinion.
I remember that.
Yeah, but it's as we talked about before, the routes to the attack are limited. So it has to come from the wingbacks. And it isn't coming from Emerson Royale. Matt Doherty's better on the right, but still not great. So what we need from Sessegnon is for him to drive at players. And he just doesn't.
That's not his game. It never has been his game.
It's not. He wants to find the spaces and the half spaces and the channels and play it off of people and then make the run. But he's not looking to Adama Traore his way through.
Right. That's just not his game. And that's what's interesting about it. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
But when he went to Tottenham and I saw all the comments, I'm like, you're not getting that player. You're getting a cerebral player that is going to pop up at the right place at the right time. Like you said, find the space and be deadly in that way. If you're asking him to run at players, that's just not what he's ever done. It's just not. And
his deep crossing isn't good enough either.
No.
If he gets past that man and crosses it, it tends to be pretty good. But if he's not going to beat that man, and so he's not to rely too much on visuals here for anybody that's listening, but if he isn't past the threshold of the penalty area on the left wing and he has to whip in like that early cross, it always hits a defender first. So if you aren't going to beat your man and you aren't going to be able to land an early cross, you're not going to be particularly successful in Conte's system. Perisic will drive at everyone, but he's getting older, so he tires quickly and his pace isn't as good. And I think both of them are looking over their shoulders because I think Destiny Udogie, who we signed in the summer and is coming next year because he stayed at his club on loan, Udinese, I believe, is probably just going to take that job. If we move back to a back four, like if Pochettino did come back, then I think things become more interesting. But I think Sessegnon's issue is he's a player without a position. I don't think he's defensively strong enough to be a traditional left back. and he apparently isn't attacking enough to be on the wing, which at the time we thought he could be a winger with all the goals he just scored for Fulham.
Right.
And he doesn't have the pace or the dribbling acumen to do that. So it's kind of like, where is he supposed to be? And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, do you think he could still be a success somewhere, or has he just kind of stalled his development playing different positions under different managers?
It's fascinating. I'm going to share this from Black, White, and Fred. I think Sessegnon isn't a wing back. He only really excelled at Fulham when he played left wing in a front three.
Yeah.
That is correct, though. He did.
Yeah.
So it really has to be the system to fit the player. And right now, you're not playing the system to fit the player, to fit him. So that might be why it continues to not work for Ryan Sessegnon, and why Spurs fans are upset at him and don't feel that they did not get the player that they thought they were getting. Well, you know what? You thought one thing, we all knew a different thing. So I mean,
we did a reverse Bale. He had already been successful as a winger,
him to be Bale,
and we turned him into a less successful wingback.
Right. But I also think, Kevin, and then we'll move on because we could do a whole show on Ryan Sessegnon.
We really could.
Is that I think that Spurs supporters thought they were getting the next Bale, and he's not.
Yep.
I mean, I know that's putting in simple terms. I just think the expectations for him were extremely high, and I just think that the way that Spurs have played just don't play to his strengths. And like you said, he needs to be in a system that plays to his strengths. And right now it just isn't what's going on at Tottenham. So it kind of makes sense what's going on. It's just too bad because I think he still has a bright career. I just don't know if it's at Tottenham.
Yeah. And he's still only like 22.
He's 22 years old. That's the whole thing. He's still a young player. I'm sorry. I'm going to be banging the drum for Ryan Sessegnon. I'm going to keep on doing it, my friend. I have to. I have to.
Sure.
But let's move on. Now, let's talk your thoughts on Fulham. Now, we talked about this on the EPL Roundtable. I shared my thoughts. What are your thoughts on my club?
Yeah, well, we kind of touched on it already, which was the fact that you got Paulinho was just absolutely massive. And I don't think people knew at the time. Maybe Fulham fans did. Obviously, Portuguese fans did. Maybe even Wolves fans did because of him being linked with them and their knowledge of every Portuguese player or player that is represented by a Portuguese agent. But I thought that was just a massive, massive signing for you guys. And we talked about it last week, but he obviously has proved to be. And we also talked about, like, I am not surprised that you are where you are in the league. With the way things have gone. At the start of the season, obviously, we had you on our promoted show.
Yep.
We're like, what do you think the fate of the promoted sides will be? And you were pretty confident that you were going to be able to stay up this time. I think I was kind of middling. I don't think I was very formally no, but I don't think I was particularly strong. But as soon as, like, seeing how you were playing, obviously everybody just assumed Mitrovic was going to be on the bench every week again, like the last time you came up, which was never going to happen.
Scott Parker.
Yep. We talked about this on the show as well. There are not many teams that got as much better as they did as you did when Willian just decided to train with you and then got a contract. Man. Just found money. You talked about Tim Ream earlier, who is a US-based Premier League fan, did not expect much.
Did you see that? Again, we watched the World Cup. We are fans of the U.S. men's national team. I tried telling people, I said, listen, I was the one that said this summer, no, I don't want to see him in the U.S. men's national team.
Yep.
But then I saw how he was reacting in the Premier League under Silva's coaching, and I'm like, you know what? He can do this. And he did. Yep,
totally. But yeah, I've been pretty impressed with the way your attack has operated. I was just looking real quickly. Since the restart of play, you've had the 6th best attack.
Yeah.
In terms of goals scored. And I feel free to correct me. I don't feel like I've watched many mistakes. And when you're coming up against a Spurs team that has so many in them, that's really troubling. The form you're on is stronger than ours. Your midfield's stronger than ours. I mean, listen, if Kane or Son score each or both, we're probably going to win.
Right,
but
exactly.
On balance, not confident heading into this one. I think Fulham have been very good this year and deserve to be where they are.
Okay. The one other thing that I would always mention, if you haven't watched Fulham a great deal, and if you're Tottenham supporter, you're going to find out very quickly that Fulham rely a lot on getting goals from set pieces because they've really become excellent at set pieces. It really has
So do
been.
we. We have the most set piece goals in the league. Are we just going to have all
Thank
free
you.
kicks and corners the whole day?
Just free kicks and corners for me, man. We're good. We're good because they have all different types of routines. It's been wonderful to watch from a Fulham perspective. I've never seen a Fulham side be this good on set pieces. It's really great. They obviously spend a lot of time. So that's just one thing. All right. So coming up next to end the show, we're going to break it down with getting Kevin's thoughts on the upcoming match.
Yeah, like I said, it's gonna be a tough one. I'm not particularly confident. In terms of who's gonna play, I already alluded to a couple of the picks. I think.
Yep.
I don't think Lloris is gonna play this match. I don't think you can after the errors that he's made recently. So my guess is it's gonna be Fraser Forster. Doherty was only sick last week, but Emerson actually had one of his better matches lately, so it might still be Emerson on the right. Romero, Dyer, Davis, Longley also responsible for a goal last match. But if you keep just chucking and changing the players that are making mistakes, they aren't giving the opportunity to get their confidence back, which I think is another part of the issues happening at the club right now. But I go Romero, Dyer, Davis.
Okay.
I think Cess probably starts. Perisic also
He played very well against Fulham, by the way.
Yeah, and Perisic really struggled against City. I think a lot of people thought Perisic was like the piece for the title.
Right, that's right. That's what I kept seeing on Twitter.
Yeah, it just didn't happen. I think we bought him a year late, to be honest with you. So yeah, I think it's Sessegnon. If Bentancur is fit, it's going to be Højbjerg or Bentancur. That two never changes if they're both healthy. And the front three is probably Kulusevski, Kane, and Son. If Richarlison is fit, I really wouldn't mind seeing Richarlison over Son. He's trying too hard. He's so in his head. For a player that the game comes as naturally to, as it comes to Son, once he gets in his head and tries to force it, it just never works. And also, not to make a very scary comparison, but kind of like Dele Alli, Son doesn't have a lot of elite level strengths. He's a very formed package where his first touch isn't amazing. His pace is very good, but he isn't great at taking on players as much as people think he is. He's just really good at running into space, where Kane is always playing the ball over the top and at full pace. Not many people can keep up with him. He's really two-footed. That's generally a benefit. He can't see with his mask, but recently he's been ditching it. I think he needs a mental rest to figure out what's going on with him. Also, I think Conte has the players really physically fatigued right now. A lot of people have probably noticed all the second half jokes, and then we came out hot against Manchester City, and we were like, oh, finally, we're playing in a first half. And the more informed of us were like, what does that mean for the second half? I wasn't even celebrating after the second goal because we were pressing at a level that we haven't this season. And it's like, if we have legs for 45 to 60 minutes and you just burnt 45 up front, where's the rest? And I think that's also an area that Fulham can probably take advantage of. But yeah, anyway, that's probably how Spurs will line up. Kane, is it still true that Kane scored in every match he's played against Fulham?
That could be true. And
I think that's true.
And that to me speaks doom for me because I do expect him to score. But the one interesting, I'm glad you already mentioned this. I was going to ask you about Son. I'm like, why is he not the same player? I think you just really explained it, but it's sad to see because I always have enjoyed watching him play. Not that I'm a fan of your side. I do enjoy watching him play. I just like
he's
his
joyful
style
and fun.
Yeah, it's been good. But if he's not playing well, good for me. So that's all. I'll just leave it that. What's interesting about this, and I'll be fascinated to see how this plays out. Fulham have struggled a bit against teams that have played three center backs. So we'll see if that continues. I thought they were a little bit better against Chelsea, but we shall see. It's not a formation, especially with three center backs, that they have done well against, but we'll see. We'll see how they react to this, but they might be able to dominate central midfield. That might be the difference in this match. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Kevin, let's get to it. How does Tottenham Hotspur win this match?
How does Tottenham win this match? blistering performance from Romero. Bentancur has to contain 2 of your midfielders and still impact the attack, which doesn't feel particularly likely. And Kane needs to score his chances.
Okay. That sounds interesting. Okay. That sounds like a lot, but we'll see what happens.
It is. It really is.
All
and then
right.
there's the other thing where, like I said, Kane scores one from like 30 yards out
Right.
and Son has a tap in and it's 2-0. And then
from a Fulham perspective, we can't afford, and we talked about this on the last show, we can't afford to have Son and Kane score goals or we're not going to win. And you already said that. If they're scoring goals, you're going to win the match. So it might be as simple as that we just cannot let Harry Kane score a goal or get close to the box. I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm sorry, did I just say that? I'm sorry. He might feel he needs to go down. Oh, sorry, I did say that. Sorry, I don't mean to offend anyone, but he does.
He's
have
had ankle injuries. He's got to protect.
Yeah, of course. So, all right, my friend, let's get to your prediction to end the show.
Yeah. Man, this is a tough one. I'll go with both of us being disappointed. I'll go with it being a 1-1. My hope is that it would be a 1-0, but I don't trust our defense right now, and I do trust that you have enough threat in your side and enough creative impulse, especially of late, that you'll be able to at least take advantage of the mistakes that we make.
Okay. Now
does every guest come on and say a draw just to try?
No, they don't. No, absolutely not. A draw is fine. It's funny because on our last show, we all did our predictions, and one of my co-hosts from the That's So Craven podcast, he actually went with 1-1.
Yeah,
so that's why he won't. And then the other co-host from the That's So Craven podcast, Jack, I believe he went 1-0. I went with 2-1. So I'm going 2-1 because, again, I think we're going to score. Yeah. I think we're going to win. I mean, I think this is Fulham's best chance to beat you, Kevin, in a very long period of time. So We'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. I mean,
do you want one extra bonus prediction?
Yes, please.
If we lose, Conte leaves.
Wow. So can Fulham win, please? Can Fulham win?
Yeah, totally. They can. And then Conte will threaten to leave again, to which we talked about on our show last week. The answer from Spurs fans is becoming a resounding, all right. If you want to, you can.
Oh, my God. Okay. Great to have you on, Kevin. It's always fun. And I love doing your show, too. The EPL Roundtable. People can please do subscribe on Apple Podcasts to the EPL Roundtable. I pop in every once in a while when a Patriots game is not on. I'm usually... I will usually come on then, but Kevin does a great show and has some great co-hosts. And as long as I don't do a show with Jake, I'm good. Just kidding. Just kidding, no, Jake, if you're listening to this.
Top 4.
Anyways, so Kevin, anything else you want to share about the EPL Roundtable before we go?
Yeah, feel free to check it out if you want. EPL Roundtable. We've been around for about a decade now. At EPL Roundtable on Twitter. Shows go up late Sunday night Eastern time, which I assume some of your audience is, and then obviously early morning British time. So yeah, be sure to check that out at EPL Roundtable on Twitter, and you can search EPL Roundtable in any of your podcasting services.
Okay, I would highly recommend it. Okay, well, that's going to do it for this episode of Cottage Talk. As always, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. So for my guest here, Kevin DeVries from the EPL Roundtable, I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, now part of the talkSPORT Fan Network.